What's up guys, and welcome back to another video. Hope you're doing well today. Today is going to be quite an in-depth and comprehensive guide really to Supercross in MX bikes. So we've only got about a month and a half left until the ARL Supercross season begins, and I'm always getting people asking for tips or like beginner Supercross tracks to just get them better in general, because Supercross is quite a difficult discipline in this game. You have to be quite precise a lot of times, and it does take a lot of practice. So in this video, my plan is to go through a bunch of different types of obstacles that you find in Supercross, whether it's whoops, dragons backs, rhythms, corners, whatever it may be, and how I go about approaching them, and any tips that I think may improve the way you approach them as well. And then on top of that, we're also going to look at just the way that you approach the racing as well, whether it's qualifying or whether it's the actual race. It could be down to like race etiquette or IQ, and how you do starts, how you do your qualifying. So hopefully everything that you find within this video will be helpful for you, and then I'm also hoping that by the end of it you will feel a lot more confident in your own abilities to then go and practice, and hopefully maybe line up with me, maybe line up with Charlie, depends what class you enter in, at A1 in January. For all of you passionate gamers, you can now get 20% off all G Fuel products worldwide by using code LINS at checkout. And for any of you motorheads looking for some new drip or apparel, use code MXPR_LINS15, fxrracing.eu to get 15% off. All links and codes are in the description down below. Enjoy the video and drop a cheeky little like and subscribe. So I think first of all what I want to cover, which I also believe is quite an underrated obstacle or overlooked obstacle in Supercross, is because it doesn't appear on every track, but that is Dragon's Backs. Now, there's two types of Dragon's Backs. One of them is ones where you want to hit every single whoop and just gently drop off the edge of it. The other ones are Dragon's Back that maybe it turns into a triple, like you've got a few jumps after it and you want to get as much pop as possible to get up and over. So for the ones where you just want to hit every single one, it's exactly the same as whoops. You know, you don't want to be kind of popping the front wheel up in the air. If anything, you want to stay central on the bike or lean forwards ever so slightly to make sure that your front wheel hits the top of each and every one. A lot of the time, like Stone Rider, who's going to be building the Supercross tracks, he's pretty good at making them in a way that you don't have to do much. A lot of time you can just hold right trigger and the bike will naturally just kind of bop across the top of them and then drop off the end. Those ones I don't find take much practice. I find them very straightforwards and something that you can probably hit very consistently with very little practice. However, the second type, the ones where you want to then jump further off the edge of them, there is a little bit of a technique to it. Now, in my opinion, the best way of approaching these is off of the very first one, you want to lean right back to pop your front wheel up, and you want to try and maintain that wheelie until you get to the last whoop. So you want to drop your front end. Just as your front end drops into that last whoop, it will compress, it will then ping you up into the air, and that will give you the distance that you need to then clear the double or the triple, whatever rhythm section you are in. Now, this is tricky. It's quite an advanced thing to do. If you are not comfortable with it, then your best bet is to hit them normally and then just double off the end rather than trying to go for the full triple. This is something really that can make or break qualifying laps on a lot of the tracks, and you'll really only see top level people like Skills. I remember at Tampa in 2023 was hitting this line every single lap, and it was just like a skill separator to the rest of the class. It really did gain him a lot of time each lap. So I wouldn't worry too much if you're not able to do this technique every single time. As I say, it's something that probably only like the top 5% or so can do, and never mind even do it consistently. But that is the best way of going about it, is to lean back off the very first one, tap each one with your back wheel, drop the front wheel into the last one, and then that will pop you up and over to get that distance and get that triple. Now, following on from the Dragon's Back, we may as well keep it as bumpy as possible. We're going on to the whoops. Whoops they're a bit of an enigma in this game, I can't lie. Bear in mind that every single whoop section on every single Supercross track is slightly different. Some will be peakier than others, some will be further apart. There's no one size fits all for whoops. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of repetitions. The best thing that I can suggest is, if you've got all of the 2023 tracks downloaded, is just go from track to track, spend about 10 minutes on each, just set a respawn marker at the beginning of the whoop section and just hit them over and over and over again. Some whoops, you'll find that you can just go through them by holding down the right trigger, and that's it. I think a good example of this are the ones on Indianapolis, where they're quite small and close together. There's ones where it might take a lot of manual input, tracks like Daytona or tracks like Houston, where they're very far apart, but they're also really peaky too. I think as a first-person player, I find myself being able to get through whoops a bit easier than third-person players. I think in third-person, where you can't fully see your front end as much, it's quite difficult to make sure it's bouncing off in each and every one. But one rule that I stick by, that I implement into every single whoop section that I hit, is as I enter the whoops, I like to, you know, you've got that entry whoop before you hit the actual proper size ones. I like to lean forwards and sit down just as I'm taking off. And I find that then instead of jumping off of that first roller, it sends me forwards. So then I don't find myself getting deep into all of the whoops and messing up my rhythm or just getting out of sync. I find that if my trajectory goes straight, then I stay across the top of them a lot nicer. So that is my biggest tip in whoops. It is a lot of trial and error. Even to this day, I've got 2,800 hours. You could put a brand new whoop section in front of me. I might get through it, luckily, first time round, but it's very rare. It will take a handful of attempts each time. So if you are struggling in the whoops, don't get disheartened by it. It is probably the most difficult obstacle on the entire track. And if you really want to gain an advantage on your competition when it comes race time, if you can hit the whoop section clean every single lap of a 15 or 20-minute main event, you will be laughing. You know, you will gain so many positions, you'll gain so much time each lap than everyone else. So if there was one obstacle that I think you should be practicing all of the time, it's whoops. Just hop into testing, set a marker on all of the different tracks, and try them out and really hone your technique to the best of your ability. So I feel like a lot of people think corners will be quite self-explanatory, but I'm aware that people play this game in very different ways. I myself personally, I like to be gentle on rolling on the throttle. I like to make a full arc around the 180 corners, so start where the berm starts, end where the berm ends. You'd think that was quite straightforward. However, it's quite difficult sometimes because you can cut down in corners. You know, sometimes it's more beneficial to cut down depending on the way the jump face has been made just after it. You'll find sometimes that the face of the jump kind of blends into the exit of the berm. So let's say you're hitting a right 180. If you're coming around that corner and you're still all the way on the left-hand side of the track as you're exiting it, you might not get as good of a pop to get up and over the jump as you would like. So a lot of it is track and jump and corner dependent. But if you find yourself not quite getting as much lift on a jump out of a bolt end as you would like, try coming higher up in the berm, just letting off the throttle a tiny bit and cutting down ever so slightly, and you'll find that when you hit the jump slightly more in the center, exiting the corner, you'll get a lot more distance than you'd be used to. Also, when it comes to corners, I think it's very important for you to learn for the most of the time when you're not cutting down to follow them the whole way around, because in testing, in qualifying, you know, it's absolutely fine, you've got some freedom to move. However, when it comes race time and the erode kicks in, 99.9% of the time that erode will follow the perfect curve of the berm. It'll be the full 180. There'll be no like starting and then hooking down on itself. It will be a full like semicircle. So you need to be comfortable with following the entirety of the berm. I think that comes with just being smooth on the sticks. You know, if you turn too sharp, you'll hit the inside of the erode and crash. If you don't turn sharp enough, then the erode will force you up and over the berm. So I think it's one of them things where you have to go slow to go fast. Commonly said phrase in motocross and supercross, but it really does apply when the erode kicks in, is it's much better to go into the corner slowly to get your angle of approach right than it is to go in at 100 miles an hour, jam on the brakes, and then get a bit wobbly and crash. So really focus on being smooth in your corners. One way that I like to do this is if I load a track, I won't even try hitting the big lines, you know, I'll just double my way around and then just focus on hitting the corners as smoothly as I can. A lot of the time, you want to get on the throttle about halfway and then gently roll it on more and more all the way to the exit of the corner. And I found that to be the best and most reliable way of not only hitting the corners fast, but then also getting the next rhythm section after it pretty perfect as well. Another obstacle that I see people struggling on quite a lot is step-on, step-offs. I see people saying that they get the step-on just fine, but one thing they really struggle with is to get the pop of the off part. Now, a lot of it is done by, you know, like trying to give it like a mini seat bounce and tapping the back brake, etc. when you leave the off. However, a lot of it is also done depending on how you land on the tabletop in the first place. It's more one fluid motion than it is in two separate parts. So if we've got, this is the top of the tabletop, and usually people will jump, step on, and then they'll step off. What they don't realise, as I'm absolutely demolishing my microphone, Jesus. What they don't realise is that as you step onto it, the suspension compressing will then give you that pop you need to get off. So it's not a case of step on, ride, step off. It is step on, step off, all in one fluid motion. It's, a lot of the time, you might actually be better off jumping deeper onto the tabletop to then compress the suspension to get off than you would be trying to land it perfectly and then riding forwards and then trying to step off again. There's exclusions to this. You know, again, if I go back to Tampa before the finish line, you can step onto it really low, but because it's quite a long jump, you then have the momentum to get forwards and do it. If you find yourself not being able to compress that suspension enough, the only thing that I can suggest is like lean back as you're taking off. Just as your front wheel was about to leave the ground, you lean forwards, because then it will pop you up into a little wheelie. And then from that point, as soon as your back wheel leaves the ground, you just want to kind of like sit down, dab the brake, hopefully then pitch the bike forwards and hopefully get over that single. They are a very, very difficult obstacle to do. Once you get the hang of it, you'll be loving life. You'll find it very, very straightforward. But I can't emphasize enough how important the actual jumping onto the tabletop is more than the stepping off, because that's what sets you up to get it correct. As many of you may know, I am pretty god-awful when it comes to starts. I used to be very, very good. In the 2022 season, I was pulling every hole shot there was. However, since these new bikes have come around and we've had new tyres, I've still not quite worked out the right technique that I'd like that doesn't result in me doing a backflip or just bogging. So what I've found to be very, very beneficial, which is actually quite dependent on your qualifying position, is just to choose a gate as far inside as possible and letting everybody else go. It's not on Supercross, but a very, very good example of this that worked for me was at the Motocross of Nations qualifiers at Trentino. I had gate 1, I believe, I think I was on the full inside, and both starts I didn't get a good jump at all. And you know basically within the first quarter of a start straight if you're in contention to get the whole shot or if you just need to back off. And 9 times out of 10, backing off will be your best bet, because, you know, with the netcode in this game and relying on other people to use their brains, it usually doesn't work out in your favour. So the best advice I can give is if the gate drops and you've gone like 20 feet out the gate and you can see other bikes on your screen, like beside you, you're not getting the whole shot. So slow down, like bind your look left and right on your controller and just check side to side to see where people are. Just slow down, tuck to the inside, and then hug the inside as tight as you can. Everybody else, they'll get into each other, they'll crash, they'll push far and go off the edge of the track. You just get to sneak up the inside, claim your 3 positions. Best case scenario, you come out top 3. Worst case scenario, maybe you come out top 10. But I guarantee you, in Supercross, where the start is 90% of the race, you would much rather come out in 10th than you would rather come out in 20th. So unless you're a god at whole shots and you've got them absolutely dialed, my best advice to you is to not even try, as weird as that sounds. Is just slow down, be patient, tuck underneath, and make sure that you bind your look left and right and behind buttons on your controller so you can be as aware as possible to see what every other rider is doing. It's much better to be proactive than reactive on the starts. For 90-degree corners, it's very, very rare that you actually ever take the berm. It depends what kind of rhythm you've got afterwards. I can think of 1 or 2 kind of examples, like on Oakland, that's very different from the rest. If you've got like a big triple or a step on, then yeah, by all means go and take the 90-degree corner. However, a lot of the time it'll be more in your interest to just apex and flat track the corner instead. So if we've got a 90-degree turn to the right, then you want to be as far left as possible going into it, and then you want to apex it basically like an F1 car, almost like flip the inside bow and then drift out wide again afterwards. The traction that we have at the moment is very, very high on these OEM bikes. I noticed that like the medium rear tyre is very, very grippy, which allows you to flat track very nicely, and it's just the quickest and most efficient way of getting around the track. It cuts down a lot of track time and space, like you haven't got to cover as much ground as you would going to the outside. But yeah, of course, there's always you know, underlying tracks that you may have to approach slightly differently. Oakland is the only one that really springs to mind, but 90% of the time you're going to be flat tracking on 90-degree turns. So that's basically all of the obstacles that I've got covered here. So then I wanted to try and move on to, I guess, like racecraft and race IQ. So if we cover qualifying first, I think a lot more people are able to run hot laps than they are able to run a 20-minute race without crashing, which can be a bit of a pain because you need to qualify to get into the race in the first place. So the only thing that I can suggest for you in terms of trying to get better at qualifying is just to simulate qualifying conditions. So download a Supercross track that you haven't played yet, set a timer on your phone, whatever it may be, give yourself 20 minutes, and just try and run as quick a lap as you possibly can. I like doing, I mean, if you run max HUD, then this works really well. If not, maybe not so much. But I like having what I call a banker lap at the start of each of my qualifying sessions, where I just do one lap, regardless on if I stay up or if I crash. I just try and survive and get around the track. That sets you a base lap time that then if you do run max HUD, you can kind of compare your delta with. So you can see where you're gaining and losing time. It's a very, very useful tool, and that is only the best way, in my opinion, of getting better at qualifying laps is to simulate those qualifying conditions, because you might be able to run a good lap in your own time, but if it takes you 100 laps and it takes you longer than 20 minutes, then it's kind of pointless. And you also, when you're testing, usually you don't have that additional pressure of time. There's some people that ride really, really well, and then as soon as we get into a qualifying session, Charlie, they kind of crack under the pressure and they can't perform in the moment. So that is my advice on qualifying. Spend 20 minutes on your phone, download the track, run as fast a lap as possible, rinse and repeat with new tracks. With racing, depending on how your start's gone, it can go one of two ways. You can either be right up there, in which case you tend to kind of funnel in behind the fast few boys for the first, say, 3-4 laps, wait for the field to space themselves out, and then you can try pushing it a little bit harder. If you do get that good start, it is absolutely vital that you do not crash in the first few laps. Otherwise, you may as well have got a terrible start in the first place. You'll find yourself way out of the top 10 because everybody is so close together at the start, and it just won't... You'll be in a world of pain, basically. You'll be kicking yourself by the end of the race. If you get a bad start, those first few laps are the best laps of the race for you to gain your time. Now, a lot of time you might find yourself getting frustrated that you're stuck behind people at the start because you might not be able to hit all of the rhythms that you want to hit. But promise me, it's much better to tuck in behind people and double through a section than it is trying to triple in on top of 4 people's heads and crashing again and losing even more time. So patience is key. And a lot of the time, if you get a bad start in Supercross, you tend to have to go into like recovery mode anyway and just try and salvage a best result as you can. We're not all Cam. We can't all get stuck in a tough block for 20 seconds and come back and beat everybody, or we can't all lap the entire field, or we're not skills and we can't wheelie entire whoop sections and gain a second a lap on everyone in that regards. A lot of us are normal human beings, so we do the best that we can. We try and recover as best as possible, and I cannot emphasize how much better it is to slow down half a second or a second so you don't crash than it is to try and send it 100 miles an hour and crash and lose 5 seconds over and over again. So just try and use your head, try and be smart, and that will see much more success in your races. I mentioned it earlier on the starts, but one thing that I cannot stress enough, if you don't have room for the buttons on your controller, then make room. That is looking left and right and backwards. A lot of people in my live streams I see complain at me because I look back a lot, and I'm not looking back in terms of I'm scared I'm going to be passed. I'm looking back to just double check where people are, because sometimes, you know, people can make very aggressive passes. If I'm jumping into a 180 bowl turn, I'll just have a quick look behind me. If I can hear someone, I'll look to see where they are, because if they're suddenly diving up the inside of me, it is much better for my race if I slow down a second, let them pass me, and then I'll try and pass them back at a later time, than it is for me to try and force the issue, try and hold on to a position, then run into the side of me crash, and then I lose 5 seconds plus. It's much better to just give up the position sometimes than it is to fight for absolutely everything. It's quite a hard pill to swallow, but once you've swallowed it, you'll feel much, much better. It's probably the biggest thing you can do to improve your racecraft is just to be aware of what's going around you, and that does involve looking side to side and backwards in a lot of the corners, especially on the early laps of the race. The only other thing that I can think of that I haven't touched on really is seat bouncing. Now, the game doesn't have a true seat bouncing mechanic. However, there are ways that you can, I guess, extend your air time to try and get as much distance as possible. I covered this before in a very, very old video, but what I found to be best is you don't even sit down on the face of the jump. You stay standing up, you lean all the way back, and then just as your front wheel leaves the ground, you want to lean all the way forwards, and you want to kind of keep that front wheel high and lean forwards until you get to the arc of your jump. So usually your jump will look like this. As soon as you get to that top point, you then want to sit down, and then you also want to dab the back brake, and that will do this to your bike. So standing up, lean forwards, sit down, back brake, and then you'll be able to get as much distance as possible. All it is you're stopping your back wheel from landing sooner. So if you jump like this and land like this, your back wheel here is going to land much sooner than if you jump like this and you land like this. It's going to just take longer for your back wheel to touch down. So it gives the feeling, it gives the illusion of seat bouncing. I guess it gives you a little bit more hang time and gets your back wheel more distance, but there is no proper seat bounce as such where you fully compress the suspension to go a lot further than you would if you didn't do so. And on the flip side of that, also, we have, I guess, scrubbing off speed. So if you don't want to just lay the bike absolutely flat over every single jump in a room, because this can lead to some issues, the best advice I can give is just as you're about to take off is sit down and lean forwards. This will kind of like bring the bike up into you. So it will stop you from compressing the suspension and going that further like we just said. It will bring it up into you so your bike will go forwards rather than up. And that is the best way to safely scrub off speed and stay lower through rhythms. And when it comes to qualifying, if everybody's hitting exactly the same rhythms and hitting the same lines in the corners, that is the only other, I guess, separator for speed, is how low you stay in rhythms. It just means you'll go much faster. And then the only other thing after that is just corner speed. So that is very important to work on, is staying low in the rhythms while still hitting the same lines that you would do normally, and then just trying to get them smooth and fast corners. So that is everything that I can think of off the top of my head. If you have any other things that you want help with, then by all means do let me know and I'll try and cover it in another video. But I think if you want to watch this video back in its entirety and try and work on each part of it step by step, then you will find yourself, I want to say, sitting very pretty by the time January comes around. You've got about a month and a half to practice. And even if you're someone that can only put in like an hour a day, if you actually dedicate that hour to getting better rather than just playing the game for the sake of it and zoning out and not thinking about what you're doing, you'll be much better off than those that just hop on for a little bit of a mess about. So if you're serious about it, then practice does make perfect. You know, us at the top at the pro level, we've all put a couple thousand hours in at this point to get to where we are. So it's not easy. I've never said it's easy to do. Like, this doesn't promise that you'll suddenly go and win A1. It all depends on how much work you put in as an individual. But this is kind of the foundation and what you need to get better. Hopefully, by the time Anaheim 1 comes around as well, I'll be fully set up with a suspension that I'm comfortable with, because I'm going to be testing over the next month and a half also. So I'll probably be able to share that with you at a later date as well. So if you have enjoyed this video and you found it useful, then please do drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you have a lovely rest of the day, most importantly, whatever you're up to. And I will catch you all in the next video. Peace.